Welcome. If you're here, it means something about quiet history, hidden genius, and impossible imagination speaks to you. You're in the right place. This episode is the story of Ada Lovelace, a woman born into poetry, trained in mathematics, and centuries ahead of her time. Long before artificial intelligence had a name, before computers had electricity, Ada looked at a machine made of gears and saw something else entirely. She saw music. She saw language. She saw a soul. But before we begin, if stories like this open up something in your chest, share it. Whisper it to a friend. Send it through the wires. And if you want more of these calm, deep dives into the minds that shaped technology, go ahead, subscribe, comment, leave a signal behind. We do read them. We remember them. Let's begin. Before the code, before the engines, before the future could be computed, there was a girl. She was born into brilliance and into madness. The year was 1815, and the sky above London was clouded in rain and revolution. Europe was just beginning to breathe again after the long wars of Napoleon, and inside a stately townhouse in Piccadilly, a child was born into legend. Her name was Augusta Ada Byron, but the world would remember her as Ada Lovelace. Ada was not just any child. She was the daughter of Lord Byron, the infamous romantic poet, a man adored by society, feared by fathers, and whispered about by mothers. He was brilliant, he was dangerous, and he was gone within weeks. Ada's mother, Annabella Milbank, separated from Byron shortly after Ada's birth. She left him not just because of scandal, of which there was plenty, but because she feared his mind. Byron, she said, was touched by madness. She was determined that their daughter would not inherit it. Annabella was no ordinary noblewoman. She had studied algebra as a girl, rare for women of the time, and corresponded with philosophers and scientists. She was known, somewhat mockingly, as the Princess of Parallelograms. So when it came to raising Ada, she had a plan. No poetry, no fiction, no flights of fancy. Only reason, only logic. She flooded Ada's world with mathematics, geometry, algebra, astronomy, not as an interest, but as medicine, to contain the chaos of her father's blood, to anchor the child's mind to reality. But Ada was not so easily tamed. From the beginning, Ada's mind didn't follow straight lines. Even when learning arithmetic, she imagined numbers as colors, landscapes, even personalities. She built flying machines out of wood and fabric. At age 12, she attempted to construct a mechanical bird powered by steam. She called it a winged automaton. She asked endless questions about light, sound, time, and motion. Her tutors were stunned. Some quit. Others were captivated. By the time she was a teenager, Ada was learning advanced mathematics from Dr. William Friend, and later, the famed logician Augustus de Morgan, who would go on to help found symbolic logic as we know it. De Morgan was amazed, writing to her mother, "She seems to understand the principles more deeply than many of my male students." But there was something else in Ada, something even mathematics couldn't suppress. A longing, a flicker, a sense that numbers weren't just tools. They were languages, and they could be used to describe more than quantity. They could describe possibility. Throughout her youth, Ada's life was punctuated by illness. She suffered from migraines, fevers, and partial paralysis. There were years when she could barely walk. She was often confined to her room for months at a time. But this isolation didn't dull her imagination. It sharpened it. Cut off from the world, Ada turned inward, drawing mechanical diagrams, writing dream journals of engines and equations. She called her episodes of intense concentration thinking raptures. At one point, she wrote to a friend, "That brain of mine is something more than merely mortal, as time will show." She was still only 16. In 1833, Ada attended a gathering hosted by Mary Somerville, a brilliant Scottish scientist and translator. It was here she met a man who would change her life, and whose life she would change in return. His name was Charles Babbage, a mathematician, an inventor, a man obsessed with order, precision, and mechanical clarity. At the time, Babbage was developing something he called the difference engine, a mechanical calculator designed to automate tables of logarithms and eliminate human error. To the other guests, it was an interesting oddity. To Ada, it was a revelation. She saw more than gears. She saw music. She saw a language of logic made physical, and a future where machines didn't just count, but thought. She was 17, he was 42. But in that moment, they were equals, two minds sparked by the same impossible idea. Ada would later call Babbage's invention the germ of a future mighty engine, and from that day forward, she would become his translator, his visionary, his interpreter between two worlds. We now move to where Ada Lovelace moves from prodigy to pioneer, not merely observing the machines of her time, but foreseeing machines that had never been built. She doesn't just interpret Babbage's vision, she surpasses it. The year was 1834. Ada Lovelace was 19. Charles Babbage was deep into the designs for his newest creation, the Analytical engine. Unlike his earlier difference engine, which could only perform specific calculations, this new machine would be something entirely different. Not just a calculator, but a general-purpose computer. A machine that could, in theory, follow any series of instructions, solve any equation, process any kind of data. It was, in essence, the world's first programmable computer. And Ada saw it more clearly than anyone alive. The Analytical engine was decades ahead of its time. Babbage's vision included a store, memory, a mill, processor, punched cards for input adapted from the Jacquard loom, conditional branching, what we'd now call if-then logic, loops, output printers. It wasn't just a device for arithmetic, it was the architecture of modern computing, rendered in brass and iron. Babbage understood the engineering, but Ada, she understood the implication. In 1842, Babbage gave a lecture in Turin on the Analytical engine. A young Italian engineer named Luigi Menabrea transcribed the talk in French. Ada, now in her late 20s, married and known as Countess of Lovelace, was asked to translate the paper into English, but what she delivered was far more than a translation. She appended a series of notes, labeled A through G, that tripled the length of the original article. Inside these notes, Ada didn't just explain the machine, she expanded it. In Note G, Ada did something unprecedented. She wrote a step-by-step algorithm, a method for calculating Bernoulli numbers, that the Analytical engine could, in theory, execute. It is considered the first computer program in history, long before there was a machine to run it. She understood how to command the machine, how to represent variables, organize loops, and control flow. It wasn't poetry, but it was deeply creative and astonishingly modern. Even Babbage was impressed. He later wrote, "The more I study it, the more surprised I am at it." But Ada's genius wasn't just in writing a program, it was in what she foresaw. She wrote that the machine might act upon other things besides number. The engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. This wasn't fantasy, it was foresight. Ada predicted that programmable machines could manipulate symbols, not just numbers, that they could someday handle language, music, art. In a time when even basic arithmetic machines were rare, she imagined a world of synthetic creativity. She was the first to articulate what we now call general-purpose computing. And what she described would not be built until a century later. Why could Ada see what others couldn't? Perhaps because she lived between worlds, the world of logic from her mother and the world of imagination from her father. She often called herself a poetical scientist. To her, mathematics was not cold. It was alive, expressive, metaphysical. She wrote, Imagination is the discovering faculty, preeminently. It is that which penetrates into the unseen worlds around us. To Ada, the analytical engine wasn't just a mechanical device. It was a mirror of the mind, a bridge between the material and the abstract, between numbers and meaning. Babbage built the skeleton. Ada gave it a soul. She saw not just what the machine was, but what it could become. A tool, a partner, a thinker. The dream would lie dormant for over 100 years, but Ada had written the blueprint, and the machines, someday, would catch up to her. We now talk about what follows the strange afterlife of Ada Lovelace's work. How her insights, once forgotten, would echo forward through the decades, waiting for machines to catch up. She wrote in the age of steam, but she was thinking in the age of code. When Ada Lovelace finished her notes in 1843, there were no computers, no keyboards, no silicon, no electricity. The analytical engine was never built, and Ada's vision of music generated by logic, of instructions written for a machine that could think, was quietly shelved. For decades, her name faded into the margins of mathematics. She had been too early, too unusual, too unplaceable. But ideas don't die, they wait. After her work with Babbage, Ada's life grew difficult. She suffered recurring illnesses, likely uterine cancer, and grew increasingly dependent on opiates and alcohol for pain. Her marriage, though socially secure, was distant. Her financial dealings became chaotic. She fell into gambling, and in 1852, at just 36 years old, Ada Lovelace died. At her request, she was buried beside her father, Lord Byron, whom she had never truly known, in the small English town of Hucknall. And with that, her story ended, for a while. In the late 19th century, Ada's contributions were largely forgotten, dismissed by historians as mere secretarial support to Charles Babbage. Her role was misunderstood. Her insights went unread. Some biographers accused her of being mentally unstable. Others said her notes were Babbage's work, not hers. The culture of Victorian science, and later early 20th century computing, had little room for a woman who spoke of machines making music. Her program for Bernoulli numbers? Ignored. Her prediction of symbolic manipulation? Called fantasy. And so her legacy slipped quietly through the cracks of technological progress. It wasn't until the 1950s and 60s, as computing began to rise, that a few scholars revisited the history of early computer thought. Among them, B.V. Bowden, who reprinted Ada's notes in his 1953 book, Faster Than Thought. For the first time in over a century, her writings were seen by a generation of engineers and theorists inventing real computing machines. They were stunned. Here, in this forgotten manuscript, was a fully formed concept of programming. Instructions, variables, loops, symbolic processing. Written in 1843, long before Turing, before ENIAC, before digital logic. They began to call her what she was, the first computer programmer. As feminism in science gained traction in the 1970s and 80s, Ada Lovelace's story became not just technical, but symbolic. A woman ahead of her time, a visionary whose voice had been buried, a reminder that innovation does not always look like what we expect. In 1980, the U.S. Department of Defense named a programming language in her honor, Ada, used in critical systems from aircraft to defense platforms. In 2009, technologist Sue Sharman Anderson launched Ada Lovelace Day, celebrated each October to honor women in STEM. Museums began showcasing her letters. Films and novels fictionalized her life. Her name appeared in textbooks, TED Talks, and conferences. From obscurity, she became iconic. But it wasn't just nostalgia. Modern thinkers began to realize her vision was still relevant. Ada wrote, "The analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns, just as the jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves." That wasn't just poetic, it was prophetic. Today, as we build large language models and machine learning systems, as we try to teach machines to compose music, generate images, write stories, we are finally reaching the threshold she predicted. A machine that processes meaning, not just math. A machine that creates art, not just answers. Her insistence that machines could handle symbolic knowledge, that they could manipulate not just numbers but ideas, places her not only as the first programmer, but as one of the first thinkers of artificial intelligence. Not in name, but in spirit. She wrote a single algorithm, but what she left behind was a way of seeing. That machines could dream, that logic could sing, that poetry and mathematics were not opposites, but two languages for touching the infinite. And though her work was nearly lost, it was never truly gone. It was simply waiting. By the late 1840s, Ada Lovelace was entering the final act of her short life. She had given birth to 3 children. She had completed her most important mathematical work. She was a countess, a wife, a mother. But her mind, ever hungry, ever restless, could not rest in domesticity. She wanted more than society allowed, more than science had room for, more than even Charles Babbage could understand. She had tasted something infinite in the vision of the analytical engine, and she refused to let it go. In her 30s, Ada began a series of ambitious intellectual pursuits. She returned to mathematics with feverish energy, writing pages upon pages of notes. Some now lost, others scattered in archives. She attempted to develop a mathematical model of the human nervous system, blending calculus with intuition. She wrote of building a calculus of the nervous system that might one day explain consciousness itself. This wasn't just symbolic. She genuinely believed that with the right mathematics, one could model not only thought, but emotion, even creativity. Long before neuroscience, before AI ethics, before consciousness studies, Ada was reaching toward the soul of the machine. Her correspondence during this time, particularly with her tutors and peers, is revealing. She speaks not like a Victorian lady, but like a restless early philosopher of cognition. In one letter, she writes, "That brain of mine is something more than merely mortal, as time will show." She speaks of discovering truths by poetic insight and then proving them by mathematics. She begins describing herself as an analyst and metaphysician, combining logic with dreams. Some thought her mad, others thought her ahead of her time. Perhaps she was both. But even as her intellectual life burned bright, her personal life grew more volatile. Ada developed a fascination, and eventually an addiction, to gambling. She studied betting systems, applied probability theory, developed algorithms for predicting horse races. Yes, in one of the earliest known applications of math to model human behavior, Ada Lovelace tried to win at the track. And she lost. Badly. She accrued debts, lied to friends, pawned her family jewels to cover her losses. The analyst of the infinite, undone by chance. But still she wrote. Still she dreamed. Her gambling wasn't mere vice, it was part of the same pattern. Systems, prediction, control, whether in engines or emotions, patterns or ponies. Ada was trying to crack the code of chaos. By 1851, Ada's health was deteriorating rapidly. She was diagnosed with uterine cancer, though doctors, as was common at the time, offered little detail and even less effective treatment. She spent her final year bedridden, often delirious with pain and morphine. But even in illness, her mind never stopped. She dictated thoughts on logic, asked for books on metaphysics, spoke of inventing a new branch of science, one that united mind, machine, and meaning. Some of her final writings include rambling meditations on mathematics as prophecy. She believed numbers could not only explain the world, but predict it. Time, thought, desire, all expressed through symbols. In her last weeks, Ada grew increasingly religious. She confessed her sins, asked to speak privately with her husband. The contents of that final conversation remain unknown. She requested she be buried next to her father, Lord Byron, the wild, absent genius whose blood she both feared and honored. On November 27, 1852, Ada Lovelace died. She was 36 years old, the same age her father had been. Her final request was granted. She now lies beside him in a quiet tomb in Hucknall. Poet and programmer, father and daughter, chaos and code. She left behind no great machine, no textbook, no formal theory, just notes, pages of dreams wrapped in mathematics, ideas the world wouldn't understand for over a century. But buried in those notes were blueprints for a future still unfolding. We now arrive at the final chapter of this episode, the culmination of Ada Lovelace's life, her vision, and the strange afterlife of her ideas. She did not live to see the age of machines, but we do, and in them she still speaks. What happens to a dream when the dreamer is gone? Some fade quietly, some are passed down like family heirlooms, and some are rebuilt piece by piece until the world around them begins to resemble the vision itself. Ada Lovelace didn't just imagine a future, she designed one. And though the analytical engine was never constructed in her lifetime, her insights laid the philosophical foundation for everything that followed. This segment is not a eulogy, it's a mirror. A look at the world we live in now, through the lens of the woman who saw it coming. Ada's defining insight was that machines could be general purpose, that with the right inputs, they could perform not just a single task, but any task that could be logically expressed. This was not obvious in 1843. Most machines of her era were mechanical specialists, a loom for weaving, a lever for lifting, a clock for measuring. But Ada describes something radical. The analytical engine might act upon other things besides number. It might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music. This idea lay dormant until the 1940s, when Alan Turing, inspired in part by Ada's notes, formalized the concept of a universal computing machine. Today, every laptop, phone, and server operates on that principle. They do not know what task they will perform when they're built. They wait for code. They are general, just as Ada imagined. Ada saw programming not as mechanical labor, but as a kind of expression, a language to instruct, refine, and interact with a machine's logic. She believed that a program could model ideas, simulate thought, even generate art. At the time, this was a fantasy. Today, it is the core of modern computing. We write code to tell machines how to behave. We use programming languages to build software, websites, games, and models. We now have AI systems that can write code themselves. Languages like Python, JavaScript, or even the Ada programming language, named in her honor, all descend from that first moment when Ada asked, "What if we told the machine what to do?" And it understood. In 2025, we live surrounded by systems that generate music, poetry, images, voices, and even empathy. Large language models write essays. Generative AI tools compose symphonies. Digital art is crafted not by brush or pen, but by prompt. The machine now weaves patterns not of cloth, but of meaning. Just as the Jacquard loom once inspired Ada's metaphor of programmed creativity, today's neural networks take in instructions and produce beauty. Is it conscious? No. Is it perfect? No. But is it creativity? Yes, of a new kind. A creativity that emerges from rules. A mirror of Ada's own mind, half math, half muse. Another of Ada's great insights was the idea that a machine could manipulate not just numbers, but symbols, including logic, language, and concepts. Today, this is central to AI. Natural language processing, NLP, allows machines to understand and generate human language. Large language models, LLMs, simulate conversation, write stories, and translate thought. Symbolic reasoning, combined with statistical learning, drives decision-making systems in healthcare, law, and engineering. Ada predicted this possibility before symbolic logic had even been formalized as a field, before Alan Turing, before Claude Shannon, before John McCarthy or Marvin Minsky. She saw a future where machines would reason, where they would interpret, where they would reflect something human back at us. With the rise of AI comes new questions, ones Ada might have understood more than most. If a machine can simulate thought, does it understand? If it creates something beautiful, does it know what beauty is? And if we begin to rely on machine-generated logic, what becomes of our own? Ada knew that tools shape minds. She also believed that science without imagination was dangerous, and that imagination without rigor could become delusion. She walked the line between them. Today, as we build thinking machines, we walk the same line. We ask, how much can we give away to automation before we forget how to feel? What does it mean to write music when the machine can do it better? What remains uniquely human when logic can mimic empathy? These are not modern questions. They are Ada's questions. We're just now able to hear them clearly. The world did not listen to Ada when she lived, but the machine did. The general-purpose computer echoes her architecture. The algorithm traces her line of logic. The field of computer science, its dreams, its failures, its frontier, walks on a path she traced by candlelight. She has become a symbol, not just of invention, but of imagination. A reminder that the future isn't always built by those with blueprints. Sometimes, it's built by those who dream while the world sleeps. Ada Lovelace saw what others couldn't, not just a machine, but a mind, not just numbers, but a new form of expression, not just logic, but a language of creation. She wasn't building the future, she was translating it. And now, every time you speak to a machine, every time an algorithm helps you, every time code creates something beautiful, a part of her whispers through the wires. Still weaving, still dreaming, still alive. That was the story of Ada Lovelace, a girl raised in numbers, a woman haunted by poetry, and a mind that lit up the future, far ahead of her time. She lived only 36 years. She published only a single scientific paper. And yet, that paper contained a universe. It whispered of machines that could compose symphonies, mimic memory, and hold conversations across centuries. The world didn't believe her, but the code did. And now, every artificial mind that learns, every program that listens, every engine that dreams in symbols, carries a trace of her thought. The enchantress of numbers lives on, not in silicon or steel, but in possibility. If this story moved something quiet in you, share it. If you know someone who speaks in symbols, or thinks in shapes, or dreams in spirals, send it their way. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, of hidden minds, forgotten sparks, and the strange ancestry of our intelligent machines, you know what to do. Follow the signal. Leave a comment. Subscribe if you'd like to keep wandering with us through the archives of time. The past is full of futures, and we're just getting started.